The Sunny Pines subdivision had been my sanctuary for 3 years now. I deliberately chose this middle-class neighborhood far from the corporate headquarters of my company, Sunstream Energy. After 15 years building a regional solar power empire, I craved normalcy. Neighbors who knew me as just Michael, not the CEO whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines. My modest two-story colonial with its neatly trimmed lawn blended perfectly with every other home on Maple Drive. The only distinction was the sleek solar array I had installed on my south-facing roof when I first moved in. Those panels had been properly approved by the previous HOA board. I made sure every permit was filed, every regulation followed. The installation reduced my electric bill to nearly nothing while serving as a subtle personal reminder of the business I had built. It was the perfect compromise between my public and private lives. That peaceful arrangement lasted until Corinne Fletcher swept into power during last spring's HOA election. I first met Corinne 3 weeks after her election. The doorbell rang while I was reviewing quarterly projections. Opening the door, I found a woman in her early 50s with a perfectly coiffed blonde bob and an expression that suggested she had just detected a foul smell. Behind her designer sunglasses, her eyes immediately darted up to my roof. "Good morning. I am Corinne Fletcher, the new HOA president," she announced, her voice clipped and professional. "I am conducting compliance inspections throughout the neighborhood." "Nice to meet you," I replied politely. "I am Michael Chen. I have lived here for 3 years now." She barely acknowledged my greeting, instead raising her clipboard and reading from it with authority. "I am issuing you a formal warning regarding unauthorized exterior modifications. Section 8, Paragraph 12 of our bylaws clearly states that no visible alterations affecting the architectural harmony of the neighborhood are permitted without explicit board approval." I blinked in confusion. The solar panels, those were approved by the previous board. I have all the documentation. "The previous administration was notoriously lax in enforcement," Corinne replied dismissively. "Under my leadership, we are reviewing all prior exceptions. These panels are clearly visible from the street and create an unsightly industrial appearance in our residential community." "Let me get the approval documents," I offered, stepping inside briefly to retrieve the folder I had meticulously maintained. I handed her the papers showing the board's unanimous approval from 3 years prior. Corinne glanced at them with obvious disinterest. These approvals were provisional and subject to review. The current board has different aesthetic standards. You have 30 days to submit a new application or remove the installation. Her tone left no room for discussion. Before I could respond, she was already turning to leave, her clipboard tucked under her arm. "The official notice will arrive by certified mail. Good day, Mr. Chen." The following Tuesday, I attended the monthly HOA meeting, documentation in hand. The community center was half filled with residents, most looking bored or resigned. Corinne sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members who seemed to defer to her completely. When the agenda reached open floor for resident concerns, I raised my hand and approached the microphone. "Good evening. I am Michael Chen from 42 Maple Drive. I would like to discuss the warning I received about my solar installation, which was properly approved 3 years ago by the previous board." Corinne cut me off before I could continue. "We are not discussing individual compliance issues during general meetings. You need to file an appeal form and wait for the review committee to schedule a hearing." "But the bylaws state that residents have the right to address the board directly about." The gavel came down with a sharp crack. "Point of order. We have moved to a new procedural system. Secretary Williams, please provide Mr. Chen with the proper appeal forms. Next item on the agenda. I stood there, stunned by how efficiently I had been silenced. The elderly secretary shuffled forward with a thick packet of papers. You will need to complete all 3 sections and provide 5 copies, she whispered apologetically. The review committee meets quarterly. As the meeting continued around me, I took the forms and returned to my seat. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived containing an official warning. The letter stated plainly that failure to remove the solar panels within 30 days would result in daily fines of $200, followed by a lien against my property. The battle lines had been drawn in the most unexpected of places, my own neighborhood. Few people in Sunny Pines knew anything about my professional life. That was by design. After founding Sunstream Energy in my garage 15 years ago, I had built it into a company with 400 employees across 3 states. We specialized in both residential installations and commercial-scale solar farms that fed into the regional power grid. Our headquarters occupied a gleaming glass building downtown with my name discreetly placed on the reserved parking spot, rather than prominently displayed on the facade. The company had brought me financial success beyond what I had initially imagined possible, but with that success came a kind of isolation I had not anticipated. People treated me differently once they knew I was Michael Chen of Sunstream Energy. Conversations became networking opportunities. Friendships felt transactional. Dating turned into a minefield of wondering if people were interested in me or my bank account. So when I sold my downtown penthouse and bought the modest home in Sunny Pines, I made a conscious decision to keep my professional identity separate from my personal life. My neighbors knew I worked in renewable energy, but not that I had pioneered some of the battery storage technology that made modern solar installations viable in our region. This separation had given me 3 peaceful years of normalcy that I treasured. Now that peaceful existence was threatened by Corinne Fletcher and her crusade against my solar panels. But what initially seemed like a simple case of HOA overreach was revealing itself to be something more troubling. While researching my options, I discovered Corinne had issued similar warnings to the Patels at the end of the block, and the Johnsons 2 streets over, the only other homes in the neighborhood with solar installations. This pattern seemed suspicious. I reached out to Marcus Washington, my head of regional operations, asking him to discreetly look into our local utility contracts. Marcus had been with me since the beginning, one of the few people who knew where I lived and why I valued my privacy. "Mike, you are not going to believe this," Marcus said when he called me back the next day. "I checked with my contact at the Utility Commission. Your HOA signed an exclusive supply contract with Consolidated Energy 3 months ago. The neighborhood is locked into their rates for the next 5 years." "Why would they do that?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "Individual homeowners usually get better rates shopping around." "That is the interesting part," Marcus continued. "The contract includes a kickback structure. The HOA gets a percentage of all energy purchased through Consolidated. And guess who recently became a community relations consultant for Consolidated Energy?" My stomach sank. Corinne Fletcher. Bingo, started right after she became HOA president. Monthly retainer of $5,000 for community outreach services. Strange coincidence, huh? That evening, I called James Torres, an attorney who had handled Sunstream's legal matters for years and had become a friend in the process. I explained the situation without revealing my plans. "They cannot legally force you to remove existing solar installations," James confirmed after hearing me out. "Most states, including ours, have solar access laws that prevent HOAs from banning solar panels outright. They can impose reasonable restrictions on placement, but not prohibit them entirely, especially if they were previously approved. "And what about this exclusive utility contract?" I asked. "That is murkier territory," James admitted. "If there are kickbacks involved, particularly undisclosed ones benefiting board members personally, that could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty, but proving it would require evidence." After hanging up, I walked into my backyard as the setting sun cast a golden glow across my solar panels. I had two choices. I could immediately reveal my identity as the founder of Sunstream Energy and use my resources to crush this petty tyranny, or I could play a longer, more strategic game that might expose the corruption more thoroughly. The latter approach appealed to me more, not just for the satisfaction it would bring, but because it might benefit my neighbors who were also being targeted. Standing there in the fatting light, I made my decision. Corinne Fletcher thought she was dealing with an ordinary homeowner she could bully into compliance. She had no idea who she had picked a fight with. I would not reveal my hand yet, but I would use every bit of industry knowledge and resource at my disposal to fight back from the shadows. This was no longer just about my solar panels. It was about exposing corruption and protecting my neighbors from exploitation. The emergency HOA meeting was called with only 48 hours' notice, a clear strategy to minimize attendance. Nevertheless, the community center was unusually crowded when I arrived. Word had spread about the solar panel situation, and many residents were curious. I took a seat near the back, notepad in hand, dressed in the same casual clothes I always wore around the neighborhood. Corinne stood at the podium in a crisp blazer that suggested this was a business meeting rather than a community gathering. She called the meeting to order with 3 sharp raps of her gavel. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice projecting authority. "The board has an important announcement regarding neighborhood infrastructure and property values." She nodded to a board member who dimmed the lights, and a PowerPoint presentation appeared on the wall. The title slide read, "Neighborhood Aesthetic Harmonization Initiative." As you know, Sunny Pines has always prided itself on consistent architectural standards. Corinne continued, advancing to a slide showing manicured homes with identical roof lines. "Recent unauthorized installations have begun to threaten the visual cohesion of our community." The next slide showed homes with solar panels, including mine, with red circles around them as if they were blemishes on an otherwise perfect face. Therefore, effective immediately, the board is implementing a neighborhood-wide prohibition on visible energy collection devices, including but not limited to solar panels, wind turbines, and exterior generator installations. A murmur of confusion rippled through the room. An elderly man in the front row raised his hand. "But what about the existing installations? My wife and I installed our panels last year. They save us nearly $300 a month on electricity." Corinne smiled thinly. "Existing installations must be removed within 60 days or homeowners will face daily fines. We understand this represents a financial adjustment, which is why the board has negotiated an exclusive contract with Consolidated Energy that guarantees competitive rates for all Sunny Pines residents." From across the room, Susan Patel spoke up. "We spent $20,000 on our system. The removal alone will cost thousands more." "Property values affect everyone," Corinne replied smoothly. "Your individual choice was impacting your neighbors. Fortunately, our arrangement with Consolidated Energy includes a modest rebate program for affected homeowners." "Modest?" Roger Johnson stood up, waving a calculator. The rebate would cover less than 10% of our installation costs. Karen's smile remained fixed in place. The community aesthetic benefits everyone, Mr. Johnson. Sometimes individual sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Throughout the meeting, I remained silent, carefully observing which residents seemed most concerned. After Karen adjourned the session, I discreetly approached the Patels, Johnsons, and several others who had spoken up. "I am dealing with the same issue," I told them quietly. "I wonder if we might exchange contact information. It seems like we should compare notes." By the end of the evening, I had collected statements from 7 affected homeowners and contact information from a dozen more who were worried about the implications of the new policy. Back at home, I spread their accounts across my dining room table alongside copies of state energy regulations and solar access laws. I worked through the night, drawing on my years of industry knowledge to craft a comprehensive legal response. The resulting 15-page document cited specific state laws that protected solar rights, referenced relevant case precedents, and included a detailed timeline of the HOA's contradictory actions. I also included an analysis of how the exclusive utility contract likely violated several consumer protection statutes. Rather than sending this document only to Karen, I addressed copies to each member of the HOA board individually, sending them by certified mail to their home addresses. The message was clear. This was not just between Karen and me. Every board member now had legal liability. 3 days later, my doorbell rang aggressively at 7:30 a.m. Through the peephole, I could see Karen standing on my porch, her face flushed with anger. 2 board members, the secretary and treasurer, stood awkwardly behind her. I opened the door with a calm smile. "Good morning. What brings the board to my home so early?" "Your legal harassment of board members at their private residences is completely inappropriate," Karen snapped. "If you had concerns, the proper channel was through the appeal process I already explained to you." "I simply wanted to ensure all board members were fully informed of their legal obligations and potential liabilities," I replied evenly. "State law supersedes HOA bylaws, after all." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We are here to conduct an official safety inspection of your solar installation. There have been reports of potential fire hazards associated with improper wiring." "Reports? From whom?" I asked, knowing full well no such reports existed. "That information is confidential," she replied. "As per Section 14 of the bylaws, the board has the right to inspect any exterior modification to ensure compliance with safety standards." I knew she was bluffing, but I also knew denying the inspection would only escalate matters. "By all means," I said, stepping aside. "Though I should mention that the installation was performed by certified professionals and has passed all county inspections." As Karen marched toward my backyard with her clipboard, I caught the treasurer's eye. The older man looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. I made a mental note of this apparent crack in Karen's support. The battle lines were now clearly drawn, but I suspected not everyone on her side was as committed to the fight as she was. Karen's inspection was a farce from the beginning. She circled my solar array with the determined focus of someone looking for problems rather than assessing reality. Her flashlight beam probed into perfectly sealed junction boxes, while she took dozens of photos from every angle. The 2 board members trailing behind her looked increasingly uncomfortable as the morning wore on. "Your inverter appears to be an unauthorized model," Karen declared, pointing to the sleek device mounted on my garage wall. In reality, it was a top-of-the-line Sunstream model that exceeded all safety requirements. That is a standard grid tie inverter with UL certification, I explained patiently. It has passed county electrical inspection, as you can see from the permit sticker right there. She ignored me, making elaborate notes on her clipboard. And these connections appear to be substandard. The wiring conduits are exposed to weather conditions. Those are weatherproof conduits specifically designed for outdoor installation, I countered. They meet all National Electrical Code requirements. The inspection continued for nearly an hour, with Karen manufacturing concerns while I calmly refuted each one. When they finally left, the treasurer, Bob Williams, lingered behind for a moment. "Just so you know," he whispered, glancing nervously toward Karen's retreating figure, "not all of us are comfortable with how this is being handled." 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail. Inside was a formal cease and desist letter on HOA letterhead, citing 12 alleged safety violations and demanding immediate disconnection of my solar system. The letter threatened daily fines of $500 starting immediately, with a lien against my property to follow within 30 days. I called my attorney immediately. "James, they are escalating. This cease and desist cites safety violations that simply do not exist." "Document everything," he advised. "Take photos of your installation today to counter their claims. We will need to file for an emergency injunction if they actually begin imposing these fines." I spent that afternoon photographing every component of my system and gathering all the original permits and inspection certificates. I was in the middle of compiling these materials when it happened. My computer screen suddenly went dark. The air conditioner stopped humming. The refrigerator fell silent. My entire house lost power in an instant. I checked the breaker panel first. Everything appeared normal. Looking out my window, I saw that every other house on the street still had power. This was a targeted outage. I called the utility company from my cell phone, navigating through the automated system until reaching a customer service representative. "I am sorry, sir," the representative said after looking up my account. "It appears your service was disconnected at the request of your homeowners association under their emergency authority provision. According to our notes, there was an urgent safety concern regarding improper electrical modifications to your home." "That is completely false," I protested. "They have no legitimate safety concerns. This is harassment." "I understand your frustration, sir, but we are required to honor requests from authorized HOA representatives when they invoke emergency powers. You will need to resolve this with your association. Once they provide clearance, we can restore your service." I hung up, seething with anger but also increasingly concerned. I had an important client presentation scheduled for tomorrow morning that I could not miss. My laptop battery would not last through a full-day strategy session. Moreover, without power, my home security system was running on backup, and I did not trust Corinne not to escalate further. Through my office window, I spotted Corinne across the street, pretending to chat with another neighbor while clearly watching my now darkened house. The smug satisfaction on her face was unmistakable. She thought she had won. What she did not know was that I had resources beyond those of a typical homeowner. I called Marcus at Sunstream. "I need a favor," I explained. "Emergency generator deployment to my house. Tonight, but discreet, no company logos, nothing that connects it to me." "Boss, what is going on?" Marcus asked, concerned. "Local HOA politics gone nuclear," I replied. "I will explain everything later." As dusk fell, a plain white van pulled into my driveway. 2 technicians in unmarked coveralls unloaded and quickly installed a high-capacity battery backup system and compact generator, prototype equipment from our commercial division that was not yet available to the public. To anyone watching, it would appear to be a standard emergency service call. By 9 p.m., my essential systems were back online, powered by the stealth generator hidden behind my garage. Through my security cameras, I watched as Karen drove by my house twice that evening, presumably expecting to find me sitting in darkness. Instead, subtle lighting illuminated my home just enough to signal that her power play had failed. While my systems were running again, I knew this was just a temporary solution. The real battle was just beginning. That night, I accessed the HOA's online document repository using the password provided to all residents. Buried in the board meeting minutes from 2 weeks earlier was exactly what I needed. Karen had indeed invoked the rarely used emergency powers provision, claiming my solar installation posed imminent danger to the neighborhood electrical grid. This was a procedural overreach that would become her first significant mistake. Emergency powers required documented evidence of immediate danger, which she clearly did not have. More importantly, such actions required unanimous board approval, not just the president's authority. According to the meeting minutes, the vote had been 3-2, with Bob Williams and another member opposing the measure. I saved these documents and sent copies to my attorney. James, they have cut my power using fraudulent safety claims, I explained. I need to know my legal options for immediate restoration of service and potential damages. What Karen did not realize was that by escalating to this level, she had given me exactly the leverage I needed to begin my counterattack. The power outage that was meant to force me into submission had instead illuminated a path forward, one that would allow me to expose the corruption at the heart of her administration. With my home running on emergency power, I decided it was time to gather more comprehensive intelligence. Using Sunstream's resources while maintaining my cover required careful orchestration. Marcus helped me access our company's infrastructure database remotely, allowing me to research the local power grid without visiting headquarters. What we discovered was better than I could have hoped. 3 years earlier, Sunstream had built a 15-megawatt solar farm just outside town limits. Through a series of subsidiary arrangements, we supplied nearly 40% of the local grid's daytime power needs, including a direct connection to Sunny Pines. The irony was perfect. Karen was fighting to remove my residential solar panels while unknowingly depending on my company's solar farm for her own electricity. More interesting was what we found when digging into the exclusive contract between the HOA and Consolidated Energy. The agreement stipulated that Consolidated would purchase power from the regional grid at wholesale rates, then resell it to Sunny Pines residents at a 22% markup, significantly higher than individual homeowners would pay if shopping rates themselves. The HOA received a 3% kickback on all electricity purchased, supposedly for community improvement projects. Marcus, I need to set up a meeting, I told my operations director. Invite the Sunny Pines HOA board, excluding Karen Fletcher, to tour our facility. Tell them it is regarding their energy supply chain and future rate structures. Do not mention my connection. What are you planning, Mike? Marcus asked. Education, I replied. Sometimes people need to see the bigger picture. Marcus arranged the meeting for Friday afternoon, sending official Sunstream letterhead invitations to the 4 board members other than Karen. The letter explained that, as a major supplier to their regional grid, Sunstream was reaching out to community stakeholders to discuss energy infrastructure. 3 of the 4 accepted. Meanwhile, I continued my regular routine in the neighborhood, running my home office on generator power while documenting everything. Karen drove by my house at least twice daily, clearly perplexed that my lights were still on despite the utility disconnection. Friday arrived, and I made sure to leave my house early, dressed in my CEO attire rather than my casual neighborhood clothes. I arrived at Sunstream headquarters an hour before the board members were scheduled to tour. My executive assistant, Diane, briefed me on the arrangements. The tour will start in the visitor center, move through the monitoring station, and end in the main conference room, she explained. Marcus will lead the tour. You are scheduled to happen upon them just before they enter the conference room. Perfect, I replied. Make sure the presentation includes specific data on Sunny Pines and their current supply arrangement. Right on schedule, Bob Williams, treasurer, Sandra Lopez, secretary, and Jim Harper, member-at-large, arrived at Sunstream headquarters. From my office, I watched on the security feed as Marcus greeted them in the lobby. They looked nervous and out of place amid the sleek, modern corporate environment. "Welcome to Sunstream Energy," Marcus said warmly. "Thank you for taking the time to learn more about your community's power supply chain." The tour proceeded through our state-of-the-art monitoring facility, where massive screens tracked solar production across the region. Marcus explained how modern grid systems worked, emphasizing the cost efficiencies of renewable energy. The board members listened with increasing interest as they began to understand the implications. "This facility right here," Marcus said, pointing to a blinking indicator on the main map, "is our Westridge Solar Farm. It currently supplies approximately 40% of your community's daytime electricity needs. But we have a contract with Consolidated Energy," Bob Williams said, confused. "Consolidated buys power from the grid," Marcus explained, "and we supply a significant portion of that grid. They are essentially a middleman purchasing power that we generate and selling it to you at a markup." The tour continued, with Marcus explaining how residential solar installations actually benefited the entire grid by reducing peak demand and providing stability. By the time they reached the executive corridor, the board members were engaged in heated discussion about the implications for their community. I timed my entrance perfectly, stepping out of my office just as the tour group approached the conference room. I was dressed in a tailored suit rather than my usual neighborhood attire, my company ID badge prominently displayed. "Marcus, is everything ready for the Westridge expansion meeting?" I asked, pretending not to notice the tour group. "Mr. Chen," Marcus replied formally, "I would like to introduce you to members of the Sunny Pines Homeowners Association Board. They are here to learn about their community's energy infrastructure." The shock on their faces was immediate and profound. Bob Williams's mouth literally dropped open. Sandra Lopez blinked rapidly, struggling to reconcile the casual neighbor she knew with the executive standing before her. "Michael," Bob finally managed, "you work here." "Actually," I replied with a small smile, "I founded Sunstream 15 years ago. I am the CEO and majority shareholder." I invited them into the conference room, where a presentation was already queued up on the large screen. The slide displayed a comparison between standard utility rates, the rates under their consolidated energy contract, and what rates would be with direct Sunstream supply or individual residential solar. "I believe we have a lot to discuss regarding Sunny Pines' energy future," I said calmly, "including some concerning aspects of your current supply arrangement and the recent actions taken against homeowners with solar installations." As the implications of what I was saying sank in, the board members exchanged worried glances. They were beginning to understand that they had been misled, not just about solar energy, but about their own community's best interests. The balance of power had just shifted dramatically, and Karen Fletcher had no idea it was happening. In the Sunstream conference room, the three board members sat in stunned silence as I methodically presented the evidence I had gathered. I started with the legitimate benefits of residential solar installations, then moved to the questionable exclusive contract with Consolidated Energy, and finally presented the financial records showing Karen's consulting arrangement. These payments to Karen Fletcher began exactly 2 weeks after she was elected HOA president, I explained, highlighting the relevant dates on the screen. Her consulting company, Fletcher Community Solutions, has no other clients and no discernible business activity beyond receiving these monthly $5,000 payments from Consolidated. Bob Williams removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. I had no idea. We were told the contract was just about locking in favorable rates. Sandra Lopez looked physically ill. She presented it as a community benefit. The kickback was supposed to fund the playground renovation. "And has that renovation begun?" I asked, knowing the answer. "No," Jim Harper admitted. "There have been constant delays." I pulled up the next slide, showing the HOA's financial statements that I had obtained from the public records. According to these documents, the HOA has received approximately $42,000 in payments from Consolidated over the past 3 months, yet there is no line item showing these funds in the association's accounts. The implications hung heavily in the air. I let them process this information before continuing. "I am not here to cause problems for the HOA or for any of you personally," I assured them. "My goal is simply to protect my home, my investment, and my neighbors from what appears to be a significant breach of fiduciary duty." "What do you want us to do?" Bob asked finally. "First, I want the power to my home restored immediately. Second, I want the ban on solar installations rescinded. Third, I believe the community deserves transparency about the Consolidated Energy contract and the financial arrangements behind it." They exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Sandra spoke first. "Karen controls the agenda. She will never allow these items to be discussed." "Then perhaps it is time for an emergency board meeting," I suggested. "Your bylaws allow for such a meeting to be called by any 3 board members without the president's approval." By the time they left my office, a plan was in motion. The 3 board members would call an emergency session for Monday evening. I would attend as a concerned homeowner, and we would let the situation unfold naturally from there. What we did not anticipate was how quickly Karen would catch wind of the meeting. By Sunday morning, she had issued her own notice for an emergency community session, scheduled 1 hour before our planned board meeting. "She is trying to get ahead of this," Bob warned me over the phone. "She knows something happened during our visit to your company." "Let her," I replied. "It might be better this way." Monday evening arrived, and the community center was packed beyond capacity. Residents stood along the walls and spilled out into the hallway. Karen had marketed this as an urgent community security briefing, triggering curiosity and concern. She called the meeting to order with her characteristic authority, looking perfectly composed in a red blazer that seemed chosen to project power. I sat quietly in the middle of the audience, dressed in my normal neighborhood attire. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Karen began. "I have called this emergency session to address a serious matter affecting our community's security and governance." She clicked to her first slide, which showed a photograph of me entering the Sunstream headquarters building. "What many of you do not know is that we have been infiltrated," she continued dramatically. "Michael Chen of Maple Drive is not who he claims to be. He is actually the CEO of Sunstream Energy, a company with a vested interest in disrupting our community's energy contracts and aesthetic standards." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people turned to look at me with surprise. "Mr. Chen has been operating under false pretenses," Karen continued, her voice rising. "Living modestly to conceal his true identity while working to undermine the authority of your elected HOA board. He has been sending threatening legal notices to board members at their private homes and attempting to intimidate them into special treatment for his corporate interests." I remained calm, waiting for my moment. Karen's presentation continued, spinning my privacy choices into a sinister conspiracy. Finally, she opened the floor for questions. Several hands shot up, but I waited until a few others had spoken before slowly raising mine. "Mr. Chen," Karen acknowledged me with cold formality, "I suppose you have something to say in your defense." I stood, looking around at my neighbors, people I had lived alongside for 3 years. "I do have something to say, but not in my defense, because I have done nothing wrong." I walked slowly to the front of the room. "Yes, I am the founder and CEO of Sunstream Energy. I chose to live in Sunny Pines because I wanted a normal life away from corporate politics. I never hid my profession. I simply did not broadcast it." I turned to face the community. "What I discovered recently is that our HOA president has been receiving substantial personal payments from Consolidated Energy, while simultaneously pushing through policies that ban solar installations and lock our community into an overpriced energy contract." The room erupted in surprised conversations. I held up my hand. "I have documentation of all of this, which I am happy to share with any resident who wishes to see it." Karen's face flushed with anger. "This is slander. You have no proof of any impropriety." I connected my phone to the projector and displayed the payment records I had obtained. "These are public records of payments from Consolidated Energy to Fletcher Community Solutions, Karen's consulting company that was formed one day after she was elected HOA president." Gasps and whispers filled the room. Karen tried to regain control, rapping her gavel frantically. "This is completely out of order. You have no right to access my private business arrangements." "The irony here," I continued calmly, "is that while Karen has been fighting to remove solar panels from our neighborhood, approximately 40% of the electricity Consolidated sells to Sunny Pines comes from a solar farm owned by my company. You have been paying a premium for energy that would be cheaper if purchased directly or generated on your own roofs." By now, Karen had abandoned all pretense of parliamentary procedure. "I call for an immediate vote of no confidence in Michael Chen as a resident in good standing. Section 22 of the bylaws allows for community censure of members who work against neighborhood interests." Bob Williams finally stood up from the board table. "Point of order, Madam President. A vote of no confidence can only be directed at board members, not general residents. And speaking of confidence votes, I believe we have other matters to discuss regarding the board's fiduciary responsibilities." The room had turned decidedly against Karen. Her desperate procedural maneuver had backfired spectacularly, revealing her limited understanding of the very bylaws she claimed to champion. As residents began shouting questions about the energy contract and missing funds, I could see the realization dawning in her eyes. She had lost control of the narrative, the board, and the community in one catastrophic evening. The community center erupted into procedural chaos. Residents shouted questions while Karen frantically tried to maintain order. Bob Williams and the other board members huddled briefly, then Bob approached the microphone. "I move for an immediate vote regarding the leadership of this board," he announced firmly. "As per Section 18 of our bylaws, 3 board members have signed a petition for emergency reorganization." Karen's face drained of color. "This is completely irregular. We cannot hold such a vote without proper notice." "Actually," Sandra Lopez interjected, reading directly from the bylaws, "an emergency reorganization vote can proceed when 3 officers certify an immediate threat to the community's financial welfare. Given the evidence presented tonight, we believe that standard has been met." The vote proceeded despite Karen's objections. Residents raised their hands overwhelmingly in favor of reorganization. By the end of the evening, Karen had been removed as president, with Bob Williams appointed as interim leader pending a special election. Karen stormed out of the community center, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest, refusing to look at anyone. Early the next morning, a utility truck pulled up outside my house.